With half the SEC battling for college football playoff spots, Tennessee and Alabama face a potential elimination game on the third Saturday in October. Welcome to the Volunteer State. I'm Tennessee beat writer Adam Sparks, along with John Adams of the Knoxville News Sentinel. UT's defense is hot, but its offense is ice cold. That combination usually wouldn't be enough to knock off the mighty Crimson Tide, but this Alabama team is flawed, perhaps just as flawed as Tennessee. On Saturday afternoon, the rivals will face off as they search for their identity and the path of the playoff, but only one will find it in Neyland Stadium. So let's talk about it. John, I want to go through sort of what's right and what's wrong with the Vols. Spoiler alert, the wrong part's going to go. I want to size up this Alabama team. You've certainly seen more of them than I have, but I've seen some as well. But first, I want to set like the stakes of this game, Tennessee, Alabama, as it relates to the college football playoff. I was going through what I would consider the teams that are still legitimately in the playoff hunt in the SEC. These are teams that, if you're a fan of this team, let's say you're an optimistic fan of this team, you can say, okay, I can see a path to the playoff. Maybe it's not going to happen, but I can. Of the 16 teams in the SEC, I believe I counted 8.
Yeah, I could go with that. I would still, in preseason, 9 SEC teams were ranked in the top 20, and the only team I didn't think was a playoff contender was Oklahoma because of its schedule, and then when it suffered all those injuries in preseason in the first couple of games, I just eliminated it from the discussion. The other 8 teams are still in the mix, as they say.
So if you look at that half of the SEC that is still in the playoff hunt, very legitimately in the playoff hunt, if I was ranking those like best case, best chance to get into the playoff down to least chance, I'd go Texas number 1. They're going to get in. Maybe they lose 1. They could even lose 2. I don't think so, but Texas will get in. I think Texas A&M has the second best chance. They lost to Notre Dame, but I tend to think they're probably they have a good chance to beat LSU. They'll beat South Carolina. They'll beat Auburn, I think. So even if they lose to Texas, I think A&M has a decent chance of getting to 10-2. But third of those 8 teams, I would put the winner of the Tennessee-Alabama game or Georgia. Like it's Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama are sort of all number 3 in terms of odds of getting to the playoff. And those play each other, at least in Tennessee's case, they play each other head-to-head. So I think that's why this has such major playoff ramifications, this game, because the loser of the Tennessee-Alabama game is not going to be eliminated from playoff contention, but I think in retrospect, it probably will. Because if Tennessee loses this game, they would have to win out, which means they'd have to win at Athens. They'd have to beat Georgia to get in. That's a tough sell. I mean, and not to mention, Kentucky's not necessarily a pushover if Tennessee can't score more than 17 points in regulation. Vanderbilt is not a pushover, I think, in that scenario. If Alabama loses, I think it's just a hard road to get to the playoffs. So, John, do you agree that this is as close as we can get probably to a playoff elimination game for these two programs?
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. And I like Texas 1, of course, is pretty much a shoe-in for the playoff, although who knows what could happen in the second half of the season. We've seen a lot of that already. And then I really like Texas A&M. I was high on Texas A&M before the season started, jumped off the bandwagon when they played so poorly offensively against Notre Dame. I've come back on, though. Connor Wigman at quarterback's he played really well in that Missouri game. The schedule has been set up for A&M. It's got a huge home field advantage, literally and figuratively. And so that Texas and Texas A&M, when they play that game, I mean, Texas could lose that game and still get in. A&M could lose that game and still get in. So, yeah, I see it the way you do it. As far as Alabama and Tennessee goes, uh, I like their chances better than Georgia's because I think Georgia's got to play at Texas this Saturday and then later at Ole Miss. Ole Miss is burdened with 2 losses right now, but in each of those games, I thought it was the better team. It's been shooting itself in the foot, but talent-wise, Ole Miss is every bit as good as Georgia, I think. I think Georgia is going to have a tough road to the playoff.
John, if Tennessee loses to Alabama and loses to Georgia and they finish 9-3, there's no prayer of Tennessee getting in with this schedule, correct?
No, I think it would take an unusual situation for a team to get in 9-3. When I look at Oklahoma's schedule, if Oklahoma could have gone 9-3 with that schedule, playing 6 nationally ranked teams, maybe it could have got in, depending on how those games played out. But I just don't see it. Tennessee's schedule is not one of the most difficult of the teams in the running for the playoffs. So no, I think it will be very hard for any 9-3 team to make it. But Adam, I didn't think there would be just one unbeaten team at this point in the SEC. So who knows if we keep having these upsets and teams fall by the wayside and you're left, Greg Sankey will lobby just as hard for a 9-3 team as SEC commissioner as he would a 10-2 team. He wants them all to get in. So, but it would be very hard.
Yeah, one thing we talked about early in the season is that maybe Tennessee could get in with style points, not as great of a record, but style points. And because we were thinking, well, Tennessee's going to hang 50 or 60 on some decent teams, those days are over. Tennessee, let's look back at the Florida game. Tennessee doesn't score in the first half. It's back-to-back weeks. He didn't score the first half. That has never happened under Josh Heupel, not even once, and it's happened in back-to-back games. They struggled to get in the end zone for a while there. Tennessee couldn't even get past the 50-yard line, which is still – I mean, you could see it in Josh Heupel's face and his mannerisms after the game. Whenever he was asked about the offense, he was a loss for words. I mean, he struggled to come up with reasons. You can tell he's frustrated. And so he had his press conference today, his weekly press conference leading into Alabama. We record this on a Monday. And he said something that I haven't heard him say before, which is he referenced a former player, a former quarterback in Hendon Hooker. He was asked about how Nico is handling sort of the pressure. Is he pressing too much to make things happen? And Josh Heupel said, well, Hendon Hooker wasn't perfect either, which is a comment. You can tell that it's getting to Josh Heupel a little bit. He didn't show that emotion on his face, but to reference Hendon Hooker, by the way, jumping over Joe Milton and referencing Hendon Hooker to say that he wasn't even perfect too. Now, I would argue that Hendon Hooker was pretty close to perfect when you look at that touchdown interception ratio. He just didn't turn the ball over. Nico is turning the ball over. He's been inaccurate. But, I mean, all that brings us to this question, and I wrote this the other day. I don't think Tennessee can beat Alabama in the way that it beat Oklahoma and in the way that it beat Florida with just lockdown defense, make all the plays on defense, hold your opponent to field goals at times, keep them out of the end zone, and just put together a couple of touchdown drives. I mean, John, maybe you disagree with me. I just don't see a game where Tennessee can beat Alabama 17-14 or 21-17. I think it's going to take more offense than that.
You would think, Adam, but Alabama has problems of its own. Watching it against South Carolina, for much of that game, Alabama jumped out to a 14-0 lead, looked pretty good, but then South Carolina came back. And it was a bad game offensively, I thought, for Alabama. South Carolina has a really nice defensive front, as does Tennessee. Alabama running backs, pretty ordinary. Jalen Milroe didn't protect the ball in that game, and that if he doesn't protect the ball, Alabama will be in trouble against Tennessee. So you would think Alabama would do more offensively. It certainly did came out great against Georgia. Um, Here's the thing with Alabama that seems out of character if you know the history of Alabama football. It can't really rely on its defense. And former Nick coach Nick Saban, his position that he coached as an assistant was the secondary, and he was kind of hands on with that. And even as a head coach at Alabama, he was very good at pointing out little detailed things to a DB, be it a safety or a cornerback. Hey, maybe I've had these discussions with Alabama players when they were there, DBs. I was just kind of curious about how involved Saban was. That is a position of weakness, of very significant weakness. The weakness was talked about in preseason, the lack of experience, losing 2 players to the NFL, and also losing Caleb Down, an elite safety to Ohio State through the transfer portal. So that's kind of what it's been. Then it had an injury to one of his cornerbacks. I think he's a cornerback. Yeah. And to Jackson. And so that affected him even more. He came back in the game against South Carolina. This is really a game where Tennessee needs to get its passing game going. I'm not saying it needs to throw for 375 yards, but it needs to be able to make some plays against that secondary. Alabama's run defense might not be in the same level as when it's great, but it's good enough against the run. It's not so good against the pass. And you saw that in the second half against Georgia. You even saw it against Vanderbilt, though an option-oriented team. It hits a big pass play. So Tennessee really needs to get that passing game cooking against Alabama. If it can't do it against Alabama, this may be as good as it gets for Tennessee offensively.
Two things concern me on Tennessee's side. Number one, the matchup of quarterbacks. Nico Iamaleava versus Jalen Milroe. I know they don't face off head to head, but Jalen Milroe can do things with his legs. Nico, we thought could. He hasn't yet. I think that's probably something they should explore. And at times, Jalen Milroe has been really good in the pass game. Nico is dropping off in that area. The other position I would mention is Ryan Williams, the prodigy wide receiver for Alabama. I don't think right now Tennessee's got a Ryan Williams, a dynamic player in the receiving corps. Dante Thornton looked like that guy, I would say, early in the season. He hasn't been lately. Not saying that's his fault. He's been injured. The passing game hasn't been there. So I think those two positions would have me lean towards Alabama in this one. But I also think, if you look at 2 games ago with Arkansas's edge guys, they gave Tennessee's tackles just headaches all night. Florida, I think, was better in the interior defensive line than on the edge, but even those edge guys gave Tennessee's tackles issues. I think Alabama's edge guys are going to look more like Arkansas. I think it could be more of a problem. And if you're relying on Tennessee's tackles, Lance Hurd and a John Campbell to block those edge guys, I think you could be in trouble. I think this is one of those games where Tennessee almost has to play call its way through some things. And by that, I mean, there are certain plays that you can call that are used to neutralize opponents, that are used to hide your deficiencies. It's misdirection, it's screen passes, it's a lot of motion, as coaches like to say, eye candy, that sort of things. It's quarterback run game. It's some of what Tennessee has done a lot in the past under Josh Heupel, which is those quick little screens to the wide receivers. Just any play call that you can come up with that will hide your deficiencies. Because I think at this point, I don't think Tennessee can go into the game and think we have the talent on offense to win this game. I think you're going to have to trick your way through it. A lot of games, offensive play callers will go in and say, I've got this script of 15 plays we're going to start off with. Whatever works, we'll kind of go from there. I think that play script has got to be much, much longer. It's got to be super creative in this game. And you've just got to find a lot of unorthodox ways of trying to get some rhythm. Tennessee had one good drive to start the game last week. Of course, Nico fumbled, and they didn't get much after that. you've got to have a really deep script, and you've almost got to, as I said, you got to play call your way deep into this game and try to keep it close.
Adam, I'm surprised Tennessee hasn't done more of that in the past 2 weeks. I thought in the Arkansas game, you talk about maybe play call your way to victory. I thought that was a game where you needed to come up with something. And I expect that from Josh Heupel based on his history for offense. I thought he
Well,
could do that.
Well, John, let me just say, sorry to interrupt you. I think they were under the illusion that a lot of us were, which is they thought, oh, this is an anomaly. The rule is that this offense is really good. The exception is it had a bad night. And it's had so many bad nights now that I think they have to buy into the fact that this offense is not very good.
Yeah, I guess if you're watching the Arkansas game as it develops, what you wanted to do isn't really working. So to me, there was a time to come up with something different, something exotic, whatever, to try and. I know Tennessee came back and got a 14-3 lead, but it didn't put the game away, and Arkansas prevailed eventually. Against Florida, though, I didn't really see anything unusual. It really looks as though Josh Heupel doesn't trust Nico anymore as his quarterback. And so here you can't trust your two offensive tackles. You don't trust your quarterback. And you're looking for somebody to step up receiver. I mean, that's not a very good combination. You talk about masking weaknesses. That's a lot of masking.
That's a third of your offense you just named.
I know. I mean, so you kind of
everybody but Dylan Sampson and Cooper Mays. Hide everybody else except for those two guys.
I just think, and we talked about it last week, I think, but maybe go to two tight ends more. But the idea that you're going to beat Alabama the way you did in 2022, that team has left the building for sure. And that offense, it took the offense with it. So you're going to probably have to win the same kind of game you won against Florida, that you lost against Arkansas, and you won against Oklahoma. So, yeah, Josh needs to really do some deep thinking on what he's going to come up with offensively in his playbook.
Yeah, I think Tennessee's defense is either going to have to score or it's going to get pretty close to scoring. I mean, even in the Florida game, Arian Carter gets a really nice interception, returns it to the 30-yard line or something. Tennessee goes 3 plays and kicks a field goal. I think they got 4 yards in 3 plays. Like when you set your offense up like that, you've got to do something with the ball, and they're going to have to get turnovers, either score or get really close to scoring to help their offense. I do agree with you. The sense that I got the other night was that Josh Heupel doesn't trust Nico with the ball. There was a little bit of a sense of, John, do you remember the Texas A&M game last year where Tennessee won, 12-10 or 12-7, whatever it was. It was some weird low-scoring game. And the whole sense was, don't let Joe Milton throw the ball. Just win the game by a low score, get out, and try to fix the problems after that. That's the sense that I got from most of the game the other night. Now, we'll say it wasn't 100% that way because there were a couple of times where it was like second and mid-range or third and manageable or something, and Josh Heupel had Nico throw a deep ball. I think there was still a little bit of a sense with Heupel that I've got to help Nico break out of this. I can't keep not trusting my quarterback. And, of those 3 deep balls, he had one really bad throw to Chaz Nimrod. He had 2 kind of overthrows. I would argue one of them maybe should have been caught. But, I would say the whole debate in the second watch of the game of people that I've talked to, and this was a question to Josh Heupel also, the second watch of the game, like once you get through Sunday and Monday, you start to look back and say, how close was this offense? And specifically, how close was Nico to playing well? I think he was probably closer than we thought in watching it in real time. A couple of those deep throws were really, really close. The Chaz Nimrod slant over the middle that would have set up a game-winning field goal in regulation, that was a drop. There were some throws there that I think a foot here or a foot there. I think Nico leaves there with 250 yards and 2 touchdowns, or maybe more than that. Now, I know we played this game before with Joe Milton. But Nico is a younger quarterback. I do think he's going to be really good. I just don't know which Nico we're going to get, or which Nico they think they're going to get, which is probably more important. Does Joey Halsley and Josh Heupel think this is the game where Nico gets over the top? He's going to hit a couple of those deep throws. He's going to get his confidence, and you're going to see a 5-star quarterback have a chance to win a big game over Alabama. Or do they come in and immediately say we have to hide our quarterback? I think that's the big question of which quarterback they think they have coming in.
Well, the thing is, I mean, you can get away with an overthrown ball on a deep route. You can live with that. A lot of guys overthrow open receivers on a deep route. You got to protect the ball against Alabama, though. You just can't have that. And again, I bring that up about Jalen Milroe. He had some issues last year, and he's been protecting the ball well this year, but he didn't against South Carolina. And so I'm not sure he's going to be I kind of wonder how he's going to play in that area too. We're looking at it from what Tennessee's as shaky as Tennessee's offense is. Tennessee's defense isn't just winning, it's knocking quarterbacks out of the game. It hits hard, and that's the kind of defense that forces mistakes. And so as good as Jalen Milroe is, he's got to protect the ball too. So I wonder if Josh Heupel might kind of see how this game develops, start out with a conservative plan and just kind of see how it goes, and then go from based on what Alabama's doing, how he feels about Nico, then he might open things up more. But I don't know if I would want to come out right away and do that. And just kind of sort of sense the temperature of the game early on and then go from there.
Yeah, and an obvious edge that Tennessee has is this is in Neyland Stadium. It'll be significantly louder. I mean, it was pretty loud the other night in the Florida game. It'll be louder than that in this one. It should help Tennessee's defense. I'll be curious to see how a Kalen DeBoer team handles that. Now, they played everywhere, and they played in Neyland Stadium before. But my sense from afar is that a lot of the problems in Tuscaloosa are not personnel. It's more psyche. This is not Nick Saban's team. You can see in the Vanderbilt game, you can see in the South Carolina game that this team either lacks chemistry or camaraderie or confidence or discipline or something. John, do you think that there's a factor in this game that this Alabama team doesn't believe in itself or its head coach as much as previous Alabama teams?
I guess that's possible, but I still look at it also from a personnel standpoint in terms of Alabama. Its offensive line was supposed to be one of the top 5 in the country. That some people thought it might be the best offensive line in the country. Some good guys returning, picked up a guy in the portal. We haven't seen that. It hasn't looked that good. Certainly not like an elite offensive line. Its running backs, as they were last year, are fairly pedestrian. I mean, these are not, Najee Harris and Derrick Henry aren't in Alabama's backfield. And for the first time since I can remember, I mean, I checked it out. In every game of during the Nick Saban era, Alabama's top running back, had more yards rushing than Tennessee's did. And this is an example that in this game, though, Tennessee clearly has a better running back. And you couldn't say that many times about an Alabama-Tennessee matchup. So I still think, I don't know what's going on with Alabama. It really showed a lack of discipline in that Vanderbilt game, but that was kind of a weird game. Vanderbilt has an unusual offense. I think it will trouble a lot of teams that are maybe more talented, aren't used to seeing that option that Vanderbilt was using. So, but Alabama really lost its cool. But I go back to last year when Nick Saban talked about in Alabama's final loss, he talked about how the team didn't handle it well. Didn't he act the way Alabama is supposed to react to disappointment? So maybe it was already there. I'm reluctant to put a lot on Kalen DeBoer and you go with the theme that, well, out Nick Saban's gone and Kalen DeBoer can't handle this. I don't think that's the case. I think there's always going to be a transition when you have a new coach. And I think probably some players prefer DeBoer's style to Nick Saban's. I know Jalen Milroe does. So we'll see on that. But I think you look at this game, you talked about it. It's not an elimination game for the playoff. But I think what it is we'll really have a good read on exactly who these teams are after Saturday afternoon. Both Alabama and Tennessee, we'll know after this game who they really are.
I think the fan bases of both teams, like the losing fan base, will feel that playoff contention is over.
Well, yeah, but that's an immediate reaction to any loss, though. It's doom and despair. They might can see a path after a few days in a defeat.
I mean, the fact that Tennessee's program is now in a position where they beat Florida, and 95% of the response that I get in my inbox, mailbag, all that is negative. It's crazy that's where the program is. You beat Florida, but you should have beat Florida by 3 touchdowns. It is fascinating how these two fan bases, Tennessee and Alabama, have sort of walked step in step so far this season. They both come in thinking they're a playoff team. They're both excited about some change, one of them with a quarterback, the other one with a head coach. Both of them get an early dose of what they wanted, of optimism. Alabama beats Georgia. Tennessee gets a lot of blowouts, including one over NC State, which looked better at the time. And then they got a dose of reality. Alabama loses to Vanderbilt, and then just a few hours later, Tennessee fans still celebrating that, they suffer a loss to Arkansas. Alabama barely escapes South Carolina, Tennessee fans celebrating that, and then a few hours, they barely escape Florida. And so I think these two fan bases and these two teams are kind of in the same position. One of them is asking, why is our 5-star quarterback not playing like a 5-star quarterback? And why is this electric offense have no voltage left? The other one is saying, I thought this guy was supposed to replace Nick Saban, and you weren't supposed to miss a step, and suddenly it looks like there are a lot of steps being missed. So I do think there's going to be quite an overreaction at the end of this game, probably more so for the loser than the winner. I think the winner is going to say, okay, back in the playoff hunt, now just go win the games you're supposed to win. I think the loser is going to feel like they fell off the side of a cliff. And that's sort of the nature of the 12-team playoff now, right? I mean, used to you had 4 teams, you had 6 teams fighting for 4 spots, it seemed like, and if you were the 6th or 7th team, it was an awful feeling. Now it's the teams that are 13, 14, 15, 16 that feel like they're miles away from the party, and the loser of this team is going to be in that class.
Adam, I think though the winning fan base can feel pretty good about this game and maybe feel like we've turned a corner. Now we just got to take care of business. From what we've seen in the first half of the season, taking care of business isn't that easy this year in the SEC. So just to say, okay, I don't think we can do what we did in preseason and look at the games remaining and say that win, maybe a loss, toss-up game. We can't really be as sure. You can be more optimistic. But one of the things that's interesting to me, to go back 2 years ago when these teams met at Neyland Stadium, and Tennessee wins instant classic 52-49. Imagine if you could have thought then, looked in your crystal ball, and you could have seen Nick Saban won't be there in Alabama's next trip to Neyland Stadium. And Tennessee's big concern will be its offense, which really did look unstoppable in that game 2 years ago against Alabama.
Yeah, the times have changed a lot. The teams have changed a lot. The programs have changed, and the sport has just changed. I for one, love what's going on right now in college football with the 12-team playoff, because a lot of games of top 25 but not top 10 teams in the past, maybe I wouldn't have as much interest. Now almost every game of that ilk has a lot of interest. I mean, like I said, to start off this episode, I think 8 teams in the SEC are in the playoff hunt. That's not even counting Arkansas and Vandy, which only have 2 losses, so technically they're in it. We're talking about at least half the SEC, and we're in mid-October. That's fun. That's the way this should be. Of course, the Big Ten and SEC will screw it up in not too long by messing up the number of teams in or whatever they're trying to get done. So anyway, John, I'm not going to ask you for a pick, but what's your feel at this point in the week? Are you leaning? I mean, the line is like 2.5. Alabama's the favorite. Are you leaning a little bit Tennessee or a little bit Alabama?
A little bit Tennessee. It's a shaky lean. I really like Neyland Stadium as a resource for the Vols. They're just so much better there. In Alabama, Tennessee's offense, it's hard to trust that, but we've seen it win at Neyland Stadium. We saw it beat Florida without any offense, and almost beat Arkansas without any offense. But Jalen Milroe to me is the key. If he doesn't turn the ball over and he makes a big play or two, either on a deep throw or run, I mean, he can probably as fast as anybody on Tennessee's team. Yeah, I think Alabama wins in that situation. What about you?
Yeah, I'm leaning a little bit Alabama, so I'm a little bit the opposite of you. I think the line is probably around the right place. If for Tennessee to win this game, Jalen Milroe's got to turn the ball over. Tennessee needs to score on its first drive, which used to be automatic. Tennessee under Josh Heupel has scored on its opening drive of games. It's something like 65, 70% of the time. It almost did it last week. It's got to have it this week. Score on your opening drive, cause some turnovers by Jalen Milroe. And this is one we never used to think about with Josh Heupel's teams. Certainly not even in the Alabama game 2 years ago. Tennessee needs to win the field position battle. They were losing it quite a bit against Florida. That's special teams. That's not having 3 and outs. That's avoiding penalties that back you up 10 yards for holding for no reason, or false start or personal fouls or whatever. They have to win the field position game, because I think this is probably going to be low scoring, and a field goal may win it. A late score may win it. So Tennessee does that. They'll be in business. If not, then I guess we're going to be looking at what Florida Bowl that Tennessee can maybe play into, or maybe they go to Athens and they win that one, and none of this matters. But that's a big ask. Try to beat Bama, and then you'll be in a good position. So you can follow all our coverage on KnoxNews.com. We'll be covering at 3:30 Eastern as kickoff for Tennessee and Alabama at Neyland Stadium on Saturday. Thanks for listening to this episode. Share and subscribe to the podcast. And we'll see you next time on the Volunteer State.